Good evening, everyone. I'm Roswell Encina, the Chief Communications Officer for the Library of Congress, and we're so happy to join all of you here tonight. We feel honored to be with you, Nobuko. I feel like after watching your film twice, these are the stories that America needs to be preserving and collecting and for the whole nation to see. So we're very excited to see this on PBS. What do you think of it and the reception that it's getting?
Wow. Well, you know, when you get to be my age, you start looking at that moment when your life is going to flash before your eyes, but you never think you're going to do it with hundreds of people at the same time. But I also realize that my story is sort of a composite of many stories. It's a story of, you know, people who went to camp. It's a story of people who wanted to be an artist and had to face discrimination in show business. It's a story of the struggle, of Black struggle. It's a story of single mothers who had to raise their children, etc. And of course the Asian American movement. And so many of you, my comrades out there, just want to acknowledge that, you know, that we started together and we're still here. And I'm so grateful to be with you tonight. And also grateful these guys. That next generation. They did an amazing job. It was hard to fit 84 years into 54 minutes, right?
I do want to add that again, Quyên. What made you think of doing a film about it?
You know, I've actually had the privilege of, like many people in the audience, I've known Nobuko my whole life. Most people know me as, well, I'm glad there was, you know, other kids in the audience because that used to be me. As Kamal could relate also. But so, you know, I grew up knowing Nobuko. Nobuko's, you know, a huge leader in the community. You know, the Aug.1 song in the scene, you know, when that song was created, when Nobuko wrote that song with Reverend Moss and Kinara, I was 4 years old. So I literally grew up, knowing the music, and so Nobuko's always been a hero of mine. But I think, you know, I think there's this sweet spot when you're old enough to realize the wisdom of the generation before you, and before that generation is still there to share that with you. I think for most of my childhood, I took it for granted, and you know, it was really when I started making a film on Chris Ijima here, and you know, came to New York. You know, the Koshiyama family, the Ijima family, but really, you know, I started to get to know the New York activist community, and that really resonated with, you know, how important the generation before was. But you know, I think someone like Nobuko, who's my auntie, I probably took her for granted as well. And it wasn't until now that I have kids, and now that realizing how valuable that is to try to document it, and not only just for myself and my own family and community, but try to spread that inspiration and wisdom as far as we can.
For you, Quyên, like the importance of visibility and keeping these stories preserved and alive and retold. Why is it important to tell more Asian American stories?
Yeah, can you all hear me? Thank you for the question. Yeah, I came into this story different from Tad. My parents were refugees of the war that Nobuko and many of you protested, the Vietnam War, the wars in Southeast Asia. And just coming from a refugee family, I think they're kind of knowing your history is such a privilege. Like, my knowledge of my own family history only goes as far back as my parents, and because of the language barrier, even then it's very limited. And so to be able to tell a story of Asian American activism and stories like Nobuko's is a difficult one, not only because things get kind of lost in memory, like as Nobuko said, that if they didn't record the album, many things would be lost in history. And I think a lot of us take for granted that there are people who kind of hold knowledge, and maybe like quote unquote everyone knows, but not everyone knows. And I think that's the importance of making films and making other artistic works that kind of preserve the history. It's not so much to kind of just honor it, but it's for us to sort of reflect about how it's relevant to us in the current moment. And I think the wisdom is like something, it takes work to preserve stories. And you know, Nobuko has been doing it for so long. And this is maybe our contribution in a different format of that.
Nobuko, you alluded to it, that your life is the American story. You've seen the good, the bad, and sadly the ugly side of what this nation provides. But you also used what this country provides, which is democracy, to give your voice out there. At a time when the nation is very well divided and, as you mentioned earlier, in a very horrible spot. How do you bring your performance and your activism together with this new voice of what's happening in 2024?
Well, I think the art is a place that you can deal with complexity and layers. It's and in a way where people are open to hear. Whereas maybe in a political speech or in organizing, sometimes people know that how you're coming at them, but in the arts, it's much more subtle, and sometimes it takes a long time to organize and get trust in a community, but sometimes you can do that in 3 minutes of a song. And that's what Chris and I learned, and that's what we've been trying to utilize in all these years in different ways.
Tad, for you, what's your advice for young filmmakers out there on selecting projects or just whatever topics they want to do? What advice do you want to give them how to make an impact with a film?
I mean, for me personally, I feel like making films similar to the song, making films for ourselves, making films for community. I think my dad, who's my mentor, Robert Nakamura, always taught me, and I carry on that tradition, is we're making films for ourselves, not necessarily for representation's sake, not necessarily to explain ourselves to other people. While that does happen in the process, the higher priority is to, like Nobuko said, look in the mirror and be comfortable and actually love and be okay with how we are. And I think just the history of people of color, media, Hollywood, we have terrible representations of ourselves. And so I think by making films for ourselves, that's what I've done. And I think, again, like I mentioned, it's only because of that the community has really helped me sustain a career for myself, not only with stories, but people coming out. So I just wanted to thank everyone for coming out again. I think that's one of the things that with filmmaking, media is consumed so differently now. People are just kind of watching on their phones or watching on their laptops. So I think to actually physically be together in a theater, that's actually something that I see myself as, maybe if anything, I could bring people together and inspire them, because really the real work, the real change is on the ground. It's the people that are organizing, the people that are protesting, creating petitions. And as an artist, I just wanted to hopefully create a space to support that and inspire that. And I think for younger filmmakers, at least for myself, following that that instinct, that calling has enabled to create a career for myself.
But also, I think the arts have the ability to heal, because a lot of harm was created to us by self-hatred. And by doing the work that your father started to do and that we were doing, loving ourselves was like a liberating and revolutionary act, just to love ourselves, just to have joy about ourselves. That was it is a revolutionary act and a healing act.
And Nguyen, for you, what would you tell other Asian Americans, especially the younger ones, of how to empower them to tell their stories?
I mean, so much of what Tad says, I resonate with. It's, when we look into history with a capital H, maybe sometimes we don't quite see ourselves in it, and it's easy to want to feel like you want to see at the table or whatever. But it really is in looking at the details and really maybe making your own table, right? As Nobuko and Chris sang in Free the Land, we don't want a piece of your pie, we're gonna make our own pie, right? And I think so much of that, for a younger me, I would have loved to know that it's not that you have to fit your story into a mold that already exists, but it's that if you really look at who's in your community, who's doing the work, like people like Nobuko's, right? There are many ways that her story could have been told, but if you really pay attention to what she's saying and what she's been doing, can we create a new kind of structure for that? And I know that's maybe anxiety-ridden for young people to think of making your own new structure, but we have a lot to draw from in the past too, generationally.
Yeah, I think to add on to that, I think that's when we decided, why now to make this film. I think 2020 and post 2020, I think there was a lot of discussion about Black and Asian solidarity, and in a great way. I think this younger generation was really calling out anti-Blackness and really calling for solidarity amongst communities of color, specifically with the Black community. And I think for me, we've actually been doing. There's people like Nobuko who've been doing that for years, and I think that's one. It's a reminder, but also two, that's just also empowering that it's a legacy that we continue, and it's more of a responsibility that we need to continue versus something that maybe some people feel like has never happened before. So I think that was a big reason for me why to do a film on Nobuko is not only her amazing career as an artist, but really her mission in terms of building coalitions, building solidarity amongst other communities of color with the Asian American community.
I just want to say that, Yuri was a huge example, just her life, Yuri Kochiyama's life, how she chose after camp to live in Harlem. And when we saw that, it was like, oh, this, this is life. So, for me, it's not just solidarity, it's life. And I just want to say that this is my family in the front row here. And it's a reason why I fight for this, but if somebody once told, I wrote a song, Black Lives Matter, and and I said, she's my sister, she's my mother, she's my friend, she's my other, he's my lover, and they said I didn't have a right to say that. And I said, excuse me? If I claim George Floyd as my son, I would say that's a good thing. Didn't matter what color I was. That's like claiming that that is solidarity. And so we all can do that, and the Bandung project is doing that. Many artists are doing that right now on a daily basis, creating relationships, not just solidarity, long-term relationships, working relationships to show that we grew up with the same racism. We grew up in the same system. We know how to deal with this. So, and we learn from each other. I learned from being part of the Black community.
Gorgeous. I could chat with you all night, so I'm going to pose the last question. Nobuko, you've created such enduring community and a wonderful legacy. What's next for you?
I'm looking at you. I mean, when I say, and we walked, feeling the ground we someday own, I was thinking about the future and looking, okay, how many artists have grown out of the movement? How many books have been written? How many films have been? How long has this series of films festival been going? We're rolling, and there's no stopping us. There's no matter who's the president or whatever. We're going to continue on, And because you're not going to stop. And so you're my next project.
We'll end it there. I can't wait until the rest of the country gets to see this film and hear your story. So thank you all. Thank you, the Asian Society.